The sun hung low over the dusty horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the small town of Dry Creek, a place where secrets ran as deep as the canyons that surrounded it. Harper Quinn stood alone on the cracked wooden porch of the general store, the scent of sagebrush thick in the air, her breath shallow and steady despite the pounding in her chest. The once familiar streets, now filled with cold stares and whispered accusations, had become a prison. Harper was a woman forged in fire. She carried the strength of generations in her blood, resilience taught to her by her mother, courage hammered into her by a life that refused to bend. But none of that mattered now. The town had turned its back on her, and the verdict was cruel and final. They called her a traitor, a thief, a liar. The crime was something Harper never committed, yet the evidence, or at least the story they told, was too convincing to challenge. The prized livestock had vanished, cattle worth fortunes, and all fingers pointed to her. It was a betrayal so sharp it cut deeper than any knife. Her closest friends whispered behind her back, neighbors who once smiled now sneered, and the town council convened under the blistering sun to decide her fate. They say the blood hunter himself will take care of her, the mayor had said grimly, his voice echoing in the town hall. The name Dakota Redhawk was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence, a man whose legend was carved into the desert itself. An Apache warrior whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his skill and honor. To them, sending Harper into the wilderness was a sentence, a death sentence. But Harper wasn't ready to die with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fire in her heart. She was pushed toward the endless expanse of the desert. The townsfolk watched her go, not with sorrow, but with relief. They didn't know what darkness awaited her out there. They only knew the story they wanted to believe. As she took her first steps into the sun-baked wasteland, Harper's mind raced not with fear, but with determination. The blistering wind whipped her tangled hair across her face, and the dry earth crunched beneath her boots, but she kept moving. Each step was a defiance, a silent promise that she would not break. Memories of her childhood in these harsh lands flickered through her mind, her mother's voice guiding her through hardships. The stories of Apache warriors protecting their lands, the blood that bound her to this land, even if her own people had turned their backs. She was not just a woman wronged. She was a survivor, but the wilderness was unforgiving. The sun beat down mercilessly, draining strength from her limbs. Nightfall brought a cold so sharp it seemed to pierce her very bones. Hunger gnawed at her, thirst clawed at her throat, and shadows seemed to whisper threats with every rustling leaf. Yet, Harper's spirit burned brighter than ever, her only hope was the man the town called Blood Hunter, the warrior sent to finish what her accusers had begun. Dakota Redhawk was a name whispered with fear, but Harper had heard other stories, ones not told in town halls or taverns. Tales of a man who protected the weak, who carried the weight of his people's honor on his broad shoulders. She had to believe those stories, because if anyone could save her from the desert's cruel grasp, it was him. But trust was a fragile thing. As Harper pressed deeper into the wilderness, she wasn't sure if Dakota Redhawk was the hunter she feared or the savior she desperately needed. The first night under the open sky was brutal. Cold winds bit into her skin, and the haunting calls of coyotes echoed like ghosts from a forgotten past. She wrapped her arms tight around herself, clutching the tattered jacket she'd managed to keep. The stars stretched vast and cold above, indifferent to her struggle. In the dark, her thoughts turned to the town, those who had condemned her, the faces she'd loved, now strangers. A bitter anger simmered beneath her exhaustion. But beneath that, a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this wilderness. Not truly. Somewhere, Dakota Redhawk watched, and she would soon learn whether the blood hunter was a monster or a guardian. Harper Quinn's fight for survival was just beginning. Harper's Boots sank into the unforgiving sand as she pushed further into the vast wilderness. The sun climbed higher, its merciless rays draining her strength, but she refused to stop. Every breath was shallow, every step a battle. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of cracked earth, thorny brush, and skeletal trees that looked like the ghosts of a forgotten world. Her throat burned with thirst, and her lips were cracked and raw. The water pouch she'd stolen from the town's general store was nearly empty, a cruel reminder of how quickly supplies dwindled in the wild. She had no map, no compass, only the fading memories of her mother's stories and the faint hope that the Apache warrior Dakota Bloodhunter Redhawk was somewhere near. Harper didn't know if Dakota was friend or foe, only that her life now depended on finding him. The townsfolk had painted him as a merciless killer, a man who hunted without mercy. But somewhere deep inside, Harper believed there was more to him, something noble beneath the ruthless legend. The desert had taught her that sometimes survival depended on faith in the unknown. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke and distant pine. Harper's heart quickened. Could it be a sign of life or a trap? Her instincts screamed caution, yet a desperate part of her urged toward that fragile hope. She moved cautiously, eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Shadows lengthened as the afternoon waned, and the desert's harshness softened into a cold, eerie twilight. Nightfall in the wilderness was a different kind of battle silence swallowed sound, and unseen creatures prowled with deadly intent. Harper found a shallow cave, nestled beneath a rocky outcrop. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply, offering respite from the sweltering heat. She settled down, pressing her back against the rough stone, and tried to calm the storm raging inside her. Exhaustion clawed at her limbs, but sleep was a dangerous luxury. The wilderness showed no mercy to the weak. Her thoughts spiraled back to the town, to the betrayal that had cast her out like a broken doll. The whispers, the accusing eyes, the coldness of those she once called friends, it all burned in her mind like a fresh wound. She had been framed, used as a scapegoat to protect someone more powerful. But who and why? Suddenly, a sharp noise outside the cave shattered the fragile quiet. Harper froze, every muscle taut. Footsteps soft but deliberate. Someone was coming. She scrambled back into the shadows, heart hammering as a figure appeared just beyond the cave's mouth. It was him, Dakota Redhawk. His presence was like a force of nature, silent, commanding, impossible to ignore. The moonlight caught the hard lines of his face, weathered but striking, and the dark intensity in his eyes sent a chill down Harper's spine. He was every bit the legend she'd heard about, and yet something softer flickered beneath his fierce gaze. Dakota crouched near the entrance, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. Without a word, he reached into his pack and pulled out a canteen, offering it toward Harper. She hesitated, mistrust warring with need. But desperation won. Taking the canteen, she drank greedily, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Dakota watched silently, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You're lucky to be alive." Harper looked up sharply. "Why didn't you kill me?" He shrugged, almost dismissively. "I'm not the monster they say I am." The words echoed strangely in the vast silence. Harper's mind raced. Could she trust him? Was this offer of help genuine or a trap? But the cold night and her battered body left little choice. She nodded slowly, and together they settled near the fire Dakota lit with practiced ease. The flames flickered shadows across their faces, revealing scars and stories in every line. For the first time in days, Harper felt something she hadn't dared to hope for: safety. Yet, beneath the warmth of the firelight, a storm brewed, one born from secrets buried deep and enemies lurking, closer than either of them realized. Harper's journey had taken a dangerous turn. The hunter had become her protector, but the wilderness held many secrets, and not all of them were ready to be revealed. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across Harper's worn face and Dakota's weathered features. Silence settled over the desert, thick and heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Harper stared into the flames, the warmth slowly thawing the cold inside her, but her mind was restless. Questions clawed at her. Who was this man truly? Why had he spared her life when everyone else wanted her dead? Dakota's gaze never left the fire. After a long moment, he spoke, voice low and steady. People fear what they don't understand. They tell stories to fill the silence. Harper looked up sharply. You mean about you? He nodded. Bloodhunter Red Hawk. The name's meant to scare. Keep others away. She studied him, searching for cracks in his armor, anything to reveal. The man behind the myth. His eyes, dark as desert night, held a storm she couldn't quite read. Pain? Regret? Or something fiercer like the wild itself? You're not like they say, she said cautiously. Why? A bitter laugh escaped him. Because I've seen things most won't survive. Seen how easily justice becomes vengeance and mercy. Is mistaken for weakness. Harper's heart tightened. She understood that pain. Betrayal had a taste she knew too well. He shifted closer to the fire, the orange glow illuminating scars that traced his hands and neck marks of battles fought. Long ago. I'm not the executioner they made me out to be, he continued. I protect what's left of my people. And sometimes the innocent caught in between. She swallowed hard. The stories from town had painted him as a ruthless killer. But here he was offering her shelter and survival. I don't trust easily, Harper whispered, especially not now. Dakota's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Nor should you. The night deepened, the vast sky dotted with stars so bright it felt as if the heavens were watching. Harper thought of her family, her shattered life in Dry Creek, and the road that had led her here. She realized she was no longer just running. From danger she was walking toward something unknown, something that might change everything. Suddenly, movement caught her eye a flicker beyond the firelight. She tensed, instincts razor-sharp. Dakota's hand dropped to the hilt of his knife, eyes narrowing into the darkness. Who's there? Harper's voice was steady despite the cold spike of fear. From the shadows stepped a young boy, no older than 10, his face streaked with dirt and eyes wide with awe and caution. Harper blinked, heart softening. Quiet, Dakota commanded softly. The boy hesitated but approached the fire, revealing a necklace of carved bone and feathers, a sign of his Apache heritage. Little Wolf, Dakota said, his tone gentle yet firm. What brings you here? The boy's eyes flickered between Harper and Dakota. We saw a stranger, a woman. The blood hunter brought her back. Harper looked at the boy, surprised by the small ripple of connection in the vast wilderness. She was no longer a lone exile. She was becoming part of something bigger. Dakota studied her face. She's not our enemy. The boy nodded solemnly. She needs our help. Harper met Dakota's steady gaze and felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. But the desert was unforgiving, and shadows were growing longer. Danger was never far, and trust was a fragile thread. That night, as the fire's embers faded and the desert cooled, Harper knew one thing. The blood hunter was no myth. He was a man shaped by pain, honor, and a past that would soon collide with her own. And in the heart of the wilderness, their fates were bound tighter than either could imagine. The desert dawn was pale and cold, washing the rocky outcrop in an eerie light that seemed to stretch time itself. Harper woke to the soft rustle of wind and the low murmur of Dakota moving nearby. The fire from the night before was reduced to cold ashes. But the feeling of safety lingered, fragile yet undeniable. Her body ached from hunger and exhaustion, but her mind was sharper now. She had survived the night, survived the wild, and survived the man they called Blood Hunter Redhawk. Yet questions gnawed at her. Why had he spared her life? What did he truly want? Harper sat up, wiping the dust from her clothes, when Dakota emerged from the shadows carrying a bundle wrapped in worn leather. Without a word, he handed it to her. Inside were dried meats, a handful of wild berries, and a small leather pouch of fresh water. She looked up at him, surprise and gratitude mingling in her eyes. "Eat," he said simply. His voice was rough but steady, like the earth beneath there. Feet out as Harper ate, Dakota watched her closely, his gaze unreadable. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of a hawk and the faint rustle of the desert grass. Finally, Harper spoke, her voice cautious but determined. "Why are you helping me?" Dakota's eyes darkened. He looked away, staring into the vast horizon as if seeking answers in the endless desert. "Because your story is not over," Harper frowned. "You don't know that. They sent me here to die." His lips pressed into a thin line. "They do not speak for me." That simple statement carried a weight she hadn't expected. Harper studied the man before her, a warrior marked by scars, both visible and hidden, a man bound by honor and haunted by ghosts. Suddenly, a sound broke their fragile moment, a rustling from the bushes. Both tensed instantly. Harper's hand went to the small knife she kept hidden at her waist. Dakota's fingers brushed the worn hilt of his own weapon. From the brush stepped a figure, a middle-aged woman, her face weathered and eyes wary. She paused at the edge of the clearing, hands raised in peace. "I'm Ayana," she said softly, voice trembling slightly. "I'm from the nearby Apache camp. We've heard rumors of a woman wandering the desert. Harper Quinn?" Harper nodded cautiously, the mention of her name like a thread pulling her back to a life she wanted to forget. Ayana's eyes flicked to Dakota with a mixture of respect and something darker fear. "Dakota speaks highly of you," she continued, her gaze lingering on Harper. "But the desert is no place for one who carries so many enemies." Harper swallowed hard. "I'm not running anymore. I'm fighting." Dakota stepped forward, his presence commanding. "She will have our protection." Ayana nodded slowly. "Then you will need more than food and firelight. The dangers lurking out here are far greater than lost cattle or whispered lies." Harper felt the weight of the words settle like dust on her shoulders. Danger was close, unseen, but palpable. As the day wore on, Harper learned more about the harsh reality of the palpable. As the day wore on, Harper learned more about the harsh reality of the harsh reality of the Cowboy land she now inhabited. The Apache were not only warriors, they were guardians of secrets, stories written in the wind and etched into the red rocks. Dakota's role as protector was more than a legend. It was a sacred duty. Yet beneath the growing alliance, Harper sensed a shadow. The same people who had exiled her might be hunting her still, and worse, there were darker forces at play. Forces that could destroy them all. As night fell again, Harper sat by the fire, the flames casting flickering patterns on her face. Dakota was nearby, his silhouette rigid against the starry sky. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I don't want to be a victim anymore." Dakota looked at her, eyes gleaming with something fierce and protective. "Then you won't be." In that moment, Harper felt a spark hope born from unexpected mercy, from a man she had feared, but now trusted. She realized her fight was no longer just for survival. It was for justice, for truth, for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The desert was vast, cruel, and filled with shadows, but together, Harper Quinn and Dakota Redhawk would face whatever darkness came next. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Harper awoke, the desert air cool against her skin. The fire's embers glowed faintly beside Dakota, who sat silently sharpening his knife with slow, practiced strokes. The rhythm was steady, like a heartbeat in the stillness of the morning. Harper's mind raced with questions. The night's conversations had uncovered much Ayanna's warnings, the fragile trust growing between them, but shadows lingered beneath every word. She knew the truth they sought was buried somewhere beneath the harsh land, waiting to be uncovered. "Dakota," she began cautiously, breaking the silence, "why did they call you Blood Hunter? What happened to make you this legend?" He paused, eyes darkening as he stared into the rising sun. "I earned that name in a way I'm not proud of," he said quietly. "Years ago, I tracked down a group that threatened my people, dangerous men who spilled blood without honor. I was relentless. Some say I hunted like a beast. Others say I saved lives. The truth lies somewhere in between." Harper nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. "And now?" "Now," Dakota said, "I protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it means facing my own demons." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Harper felt a shiver, not from cold, but from the knowledge that their journey was far from over. Their fragile peace shattered as the distant sound of horses' hooves echoed through the canyon. Harper's heart clenched. "They found me," she whispered. Dakota was already moving, his stance shifting from calm to warrior in a heartbeat. "Get ready." From the rocky ridge above, a posse of men appeared, their faces hard and unfamiliar, but their intent clear. They were hunters sent by the town to bring Harper back, dead or alive. The desert seemed to hold its breath as Dakota stepped forward, placing himself between Harper and the approaching danger. His eyes burned with fierce protectiveness. "Leave her be," he warned, voice cold as steel. The leader sneered. "Blood hunter? We'll see how much you care when you're lying in the dust." A brutal battle erupted under the vast sky. Dust flew, fists collided, and steel flashed. Dakota fought with a ferocity that matched the desert sun, each strike precise, fueled by years of hardship and honor. Harper, though weary, found a spark within herself, an untapped strength born of desperation and defiance. When the dust settled, the men lay defeated, groaning but alive. Dakota's gaze met Harper's, a silent promise in his eyes. "You won't be taken back," he said. Harper exhaled, the tension easing, but the danger was far from over. That night, as they tended to wounds and huddled by the fire, Dakota shared a secret he had kept buried deep, one that changed everything Harper thought she knew about her exile. "There's more behind your betrayal," he revealed. "The town's leaders are hiding something that could destroy them all. If it comes to light." Harper's pulse quickened. "What?" Dakota looked toward the shadows beyond the firelight, voice dropping to a whisper. "They've been smuggling weapons, stirring trouble with nearby tribes. Your being blamed was a convenient distraction." The revelation shattered Harper's world. Her exile wasn't just a punishment, it was a cover-up, but there was hope. "Can expose them," Dakota said firmly, "together." Harper's eyes burned with determination. "Then let's finish this." The desert night stretched wide and endless around them, filled with whispered secrets and promises of justice. Harper knew their path was dangerous, their enemies ruthless, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. With Dakota by her side, the blood hunter and the betrayed woman, she was ready to reclaim her life and bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The night was thick with silence as Harper and Dakota crept through the shadowed canyon, every step measured and careful. The truth they sought was closer than ever, but so was danger, sharper, more relentless than either had imagined. Harper's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what lay ahead. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for justice, for the Apache people, and for a future where lies could no longer bury the truth. They reached the edge of the town just before dawn, the sleepy streets cloaked in pale blue light. Dakota's eyes scanned the windows and rooftops, every muscle coiled and ready. The corruption they had uncovered ran deep, and the town's leaders would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Harper's jaw tightened as she whispered, "We need evidence." "Something they can't deny," Dakota nodded. "There's a ledger hidden in the mayor's office. It contains proof of the weapons deals, the lies, everything." Together, they slipped into the town, shadows among shadows. The air smelled of dust and old money, of whispered betrayals long forgotten by the daylight. Harper's breath hitched as they neared the mayor's house, a grand, imposing structure that seemed out of place among the weathered buildings. Inside, the silence was oppressive, broken only by their careful footsteps. Harper's hands trembled as they rifled through drawers, searching for the ledger. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching into eternity. Then, beneath a loose floorboard, Harper's fingers closed around a thick, leather-bound book. Triumph surged through her, but the danger was far from over. Suddenly, a cold voice echoed from the doorway. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The mayor himself stood there, flanked by armed men. His smile was thin and cruel, eyes glinting with malice. Dakota stepped forward, unwavering. "This ends tonight." The mayor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think you can just waltz in and steal from me? You're a fool." Harper's pulse quickened as the men closed in. But she was no longer the frightened girl cast out to die. Her hand found Dakota's, a silent vow passing between them. Suddenly, from the darkness, Ayanna and the Apache warriors emerged, weapons drawn and eyes blazing with fierce loyalty. The mayor's men hesitated, caught between outrage and fear. Standoff erupted, the room charged with tension as old wounds and new alliances collided. Harper stepped forward, voice steady and clear. "You framed me to cover your crimes. Your greed threatens everyone, but the truth is here." She held up the ledger, its pages heavy with evidence. The mayor's face twisted with rage. "You'll pay for this." But the power had shifted. The Apache warriors closed ranks, ready to protect the woman they had come to trust. In the chaos that followed, justice was swift and unyielding. The mayor and his accomplices were arrested, their secrets exposed to a town forced to confront its darkest sins. As dawn broke, Harper stood outside, the first rays of sunlight washing over her face. Dakota appeared beside her, his presence steady and strong. "You did it," he said quietly. Harper smiled, a mix of relief and newfound strength. "We did it." The desert wind swept through the streets, carrying with it the promise of change. Harper's exile had become her rebirth. She had faced betrayal, survived the wilderness, and uncovered a truth that would echo far beyond the dusty borders of Dry Creek. And with Dakota Redhawk Bloodhunter no more, but protector and friend, she was ready to write the next chapter of her life, not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her destiny. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. The future was hers to shape, fierce and free, like the desert wind itself. Days passed after the mayor's arrest, and the town began to breathe a cautious sigh of relief. The truth was out, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in Dry Creek. Harper felt the weight of her exile lifting, replaced by a tentative sense of belonging. But peace, as Dakota had warned, was a fragile thing in the desert. One evening, as Harper and Dakota sat by the campfire near the Apache settlement, a messenger arrived, a young scout, eyes wide with urgency. "There's news from town," he said breathlessly. "The mayor's men aren't finished." Harper's stomach twisted. What do you mean? They're planning something. Revenge. Tonight. Dakota's jaw clenched. We need to act fast. That night, shadows crept through the town like ghosts, silent but deadly. Harper and Dakota rode hard, racing against time, guided by the scouts' knowledge of secret paths and hidden dangers. They reached the town square just as a group of armed men, disguised and ruthless, began their attack not on the town, but on the very people who had stood for justice. Harper's heart pounded as she saw familiar faces fall, friends, allies, innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Dakota roared a battle cry, charging into the fray with fierce determination. Harper followed, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Amid the chaos, Harper spotted a figure moving with cold precision, a shadow blending into the darkness. Her breath caught as recognition hit like a thunderclap. It was Ayanna. Why? Harper demanded, disbelief and betrayal ripping through her. Ayanna's eyes were hard, cold. You think this is about justice? This is about power. The Apache tribe can't survive if the town falls apart. The mayor's corruption was bad, but his control kept worse chaos at bay. Harper staggered back, the truth shattering her. The ally she had trusted was the architect of the new violence. Dakota's voice was a growl behind her. You betrayed. U.S. all. Ayanna drew a hidden knife, her face twisted with desperation. Sometimes survival means sacrifice. The fight was brutal and fast. Dakota disarmed her with a swift strike, while Harper held Ayanna down, shaking with a mix of sorrow and fury. You were supposed to protect us, Harper whispered. Ayanna's eyes softened for a fleeting moment. I did what I had to. As the first light of dawn bled into the sky, the town was silent once more. But the wounds ran deep, both visible and unseen. Harper and Dakota stood together, bruised but unbroken, knowing that the true battle was far from over. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, but it steeled a resolve in the heart of the desert. Trust was as scarce as water, and survival meant facing not only enemies without, but shadows within. Their fight for justice had turned into a fight for truth, no matter the cost. And Harper Quinn was ready to face whatever darkness still lurked beneath the unforgiving sun. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale gold over Dry Creek, but Harper felt the weight of night's betrayal pressing down on her like a stone. Ayanna's treachery echoed in her mind, a bitter reminder that in the desert, trust was a currency too costly to spend lightly. Dakota stood silently beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon as if the desert might reveal some hidden answer. The Apache warrior's usual stoic demeanor was cracked, revealing a rare hint of uncertainty. We've been blindsided, Harper said, voice low but fierce. Ayanna wasn't just protecting the tribe, she was hiding something else. Dakota nodded grimly. She's connected to forces deeper than we realized. I've heard whispers. Old enemies, men from my past who wouldn't rest until every threat was crushed. Harper's brow furrowed. Enemies from your past? Men who deal in shadows and blood. They've been watching, waiting. Ayanna's betrayal might be just the beginning. The gravity of his words settled heavily between them. Harper realized their fight was no longer about clearing her name or exposing corruption. It was about survival against an unseen enemy, lurking in the edges of the desert's unforgiving silence. Determined to uncover the truth, Harper and Dakota decided to seek out an old friend of his, a recluse named Ezekiel Zeke Morgan, a former bounty hunter turned desert guide. Known for his sharp mind and even sharper instincts, Zeke was a man few trusted, but many feared. They found him living on the outskirts of a forgotten settlement, a weathered cabin surrounded by relics of a life spent chasing ghosts. His eyes, cold and calculating, flickered with recognition when Dakota approached. You brought trouble, Zeke said, voice gravelly but not unkind. "Trouble's already here," Dakota replied. "And it's bigger than any of us imagined." Harper watched as the three of them huddled over maps and worn journals, piecing together fragments of information, stories of smuggling rings, secret alliances, and a shadowy figure known only as the Raven, said to orchestrate chaos from the shadows. "This Raven," Harper asked, leaning forward, "what does he want?" Zeke's eyes narrowed. "Control, power, and a clean slate to erase anyone who stands in his way." Harper's heart raced. Could the Raven be behind the mayor's corruption, Ayana's betrayal, the attacks that threatened to tear their world apart? As the day faded into night, Dakota's face hardened. "We need to find him before he finds U.S." Their search led them deeper into the desert, where the land grew wild and unforgiving. Each step was a test of endurance, the relentless sun beating down like a merciless judge. One evening, as they camped beneath a sky glittering with stars, Harper finally allowed herself to speak her fear aloud. "If the Raven controls so much, how can we stop him? We're just two people against an empire of lies." Dakota reached over, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "We're not alone anymore. There are others who want justice, others who've suffered under his hand." Hope flickered in Harper's chest, a fragile flame but enough to ignite resolve. Days later, they found a hidden outpost carved into the cliffs, a place whispered about in local legends but never confirmed. Inside, evidence of the Raven's network was unmistakable. Crates marked with foreign insignias, weapons hidden beneath piles of sand, and messages coded in symbols only Dakota recognized. As they sifted through the trove, a sudden noise shattered the stillness. A trap sprung. From the shadows emerged masked figures, weapons raised, eyes burning with cold intent. The battle was swift and brutal. Harper fought beside Dakota with a fierceness born of desperation, their movements a deadly dance against overwhelming odds. When the last assailant fell, silence reclaimed the cavern. Breathing heavily, Harper found a small leather-bound journal dropped in the chaos. Opening it, her eyes scanned the pages filled with plans, names, and dates, evidence that could dismantle the Raven's empire. But among the entries, a name stood out, one she never expected, a name tied directly to her own past. Her breath caught. The web of betrayal was tighter than she feared, and the desert held more secrets than sand. Dakota looked at her, the question clear in his gaze. "We have to face this, together." Harper nodded, steeling herself for the final confrontation. The fight for truth and justice was no longer just a battle for a town. It was a reckoning that would reach into the darkest corners of their souls. And as the desert wind whispered around them, Harper Quinn realized that the shadows of her past were not finished with her yet. Wind howled through the canyon like a warning as Harper clutched the leather-bound journal tighter in her hands. It smelled of oil, ash, and something older secrets soaked deep into the hide. But it wasn't the journal's age that made her knees go weak. It was the name written across the top of the final page. Colton Quinn. Her father. Dead for over 15 years at least, that's what she had believed. She remembered the sheriff knocking on their door, hat in hand, telling her mother that Colton's body was found in a ravine, stripped clean by coyotes. There was no funeral, no grave, just a box of personal items and a lifetime of unanswered questions. Now his name was here in the Raven's ledger, tied to illegal arms deals, land seizures, and names of powerful men scattered across Arizona, New Mexico, and Dry Creek. Dakota stepped beside her, his brow creased. "What is it?" Harper swallowed, her throat dry as bone. "My father. His name's in here. He's part of it." Dakota's eyes darkened. "Or ... he was framed." "No," she whispered. "He always had secrets. I just didn't want to believe they mattered." Before they could dig deeper, a sharp whistle echoed from the canyon entrance. Zeke appeared, bloodied and out of breath. "We've got company, a whole lot of it." Behind him, a dust storm swirled on the horizon, only it wasn't weather. It was men. Dozens of them, riding hard, led by a figure draped in black. Dakota stiffened. "It's him, the Raven." Harper tucked the journal into her coat and turned to face the storm. "Then let's meet him." They set their final stand near an ancient ruin, a crumbling Spanish mission swallowed by sand and silence. There, hidden rifles lined the broken walls, and the Apache allies had taken position. Harper stood atop the bell tower, scanning the dusty horizon through a cracked spyglass. As the riders approached, the Raven emerged tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed black hat. He raised a hand, and the cavalry stopped. "Harper." "Quinn," his voice rang out, distorted and deep. "You have something that belongs to me." She stepped forward, defiant. "A book of your sins?" "Sorry, I'm keeping it." He chuckled, slow and hollow. "You sound just like your father." Harper froze. "You knew him," she said. "You worked with him." "No," the Raven said. "I made him, and I destroyed him." A shot rang out too close. Harper ducked, and chaos exploded. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Dust turned red. Screams echoed through the ancient stone. Dakota fought like a man possessed, moving through the fray with fury and focus. Zeke held the flank, picking off riders with deadly precision. But Harper had one target in mind. She charged from the tower, racing toward the Raven's position. He moved smoothly, drawing 2 pistols and firing. The shots missed, but not by much. They met in the center of the ruins, her knife against his revolver. He knocked her back, but she twisted mid-fall, slashing his coat open. A symbol gleamed beneath an old Confederate insignia, worn on the inside. And then the wind ripped his hat away. Harper staggered. The Raven was not a stranger. It was Marshall, William Tavers, Dry Creek's former sheriff. The same man who told her Colton Quinn was dead. "You," she breathed. "You lied to me." "My whole life," Tavers sneered. "Your father got cold feet. Wanted out, so I gave him an exit. You murdered him. I made him a martyr. Now I'll do the same for you." But Harper was faster. She raised her father's old revolver, when the sheriff himself had returned to her after Colton's death, and fired. The bullet struck Tavers in the chest, knocking him backward. He crumpled to the sand, eyes wide in disbelief. "I learned how to shoot from him," she said coldly. The dust settled. Bodies lay still. Survivors limped from the wreckage. Dakota found her near the altar of the broken chapel, staring at the blood-stained journal in her lap. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I will be." They rode back to Dry Creek with the ledger, the Raven's mask, and the truth. Harper stood before the town that once condemned her, no longer a fugitive but a witness. And this time, they listened. The wind carried silence through Dry Creek as Harper Quinn stood at the edge of town, the Raven's black hat in her hand. The same people who had once exiled her now watched in stunned quiet. Not a murmur, not a whisper, just the weight of truth finally crashing into place. The ledger lay on the table behind her, its blood-stained pages exposed for anyone willing to read. The lies, the betrayals, the corruption that had rotted the town from the inside out, all documented in neat handwriting, sealed by the deaths of men who thought themselves untouchable. Harper didn't need to raise her voice. "The man you trusted," she said, scanning their faces. "The man you called Sheriff Tavers was the Raven, the architect of all of this. My father tried to stop him. You were told he died a coward in the desert." She paused, her throat tight. "He died trying to protect you." No one interrupted. Even the wind seemed to still. "He wasn't perfect," she continued, "but he tried to make it right. And for that, he was murdered." An older woman near the back, the same one who'd once spit near Harper's feet at the town hall, lowered her eyes in shame. A young man gripped his hat tighter, unable to meet Harper's gaze. The guilt hung in the air, but Harper wasn't. Here for vengeance. She was here for closure. Dakota stood behind her, his towering figure a silent force of strength. He'd stayed at her side through every betrayal, every mile of dust and fire. Now in the quiet aftermath, she could finally feel the weight of their journey settling into her bones. The new mayor, a once hesitant schoolteacher named Ruth Ellison, stepped forward. "Miss Quinn," she said with a shaky voice, "on behalf of Dry Creek, I'm sorry for what we did to you, for what we let happen under our watch." Harper nodded once. "Make it right. That's all I want." And with that, she turned her back on the town, not out of anger, but because she had more to do, and standing still was not in her nature. They buried Culkin-Quinn's revolver at the edge of the desert, under a lone mesquite tree where the wind always seemed to sing. Harper didn't cry. She'd shed her tears in the canyon, when she first opened the ledger and found the handwriting she'd spent her childhood staring at in old notebooks. Instead, she stood silently, Dakota beside her, and whispered one word: home. It wasn't where she came from. It was who she had become. Weeks passed, and Dry Creek began to change. The Apache tribe, once treated as outsiders, were now consulted in council meetings. Zeke, against every bet ever placed on him, had taken up the badge, not as a sheriff, but as a protector. Dakota helped establish a peace trail that ran from the canyon to the trading posts, ensuring safe passage and fair trade. And Harper? She didn't stay. Not out of bitterness, she had made her peace. But her heart was now set on uncovering truths buried far beyond Dry Creek. There were other towns, other names in that ledger, and if there was one thing Harper Quinn had learned, it was this: justice doesn't wait for permission. On the eve of her departure, Harper visited Dakota one last time. His camp was quiet, the fire low. He looked up from sharpening his blade and gave her that familiar nod, the one that spoke volumes more than words. "You leaving at first light?" he asked. She nodded. "There's a man in El Paso, another name in the ledger. Thought I'd ask him a few questions." Dakota smirked. "You gonna ask with words or bullets?" Harper smiled faintly. "Depends on his answers." A long pause stretched between them. He finally stood, towering over her, but gentle in the way he reached for her hand. "You sure you want to do this alone?" She met his eyes, strong, tired, unwavering. "I'm not alone. Not anymore. I carry every lesson, every name, every mile. That's enough for now." He nodded, respecting her answer but not hiding his disappointment. "You ever need a tracker?" he said. "I'll find you," she finished. They shared no kiss, no overdramatic goodbye. Just two warriors, bound by fire and dust, understanding that love didn't need labels when it lived in the marrow. As Harper rode out into the rising dawn, the desert unfolded before her like a never-ending story. Somewhere out there were still ghosts to confront, men to bring down, and wounds that needed light to heal. She didn't ride to escape. She rode to finish what her father started, and behind her, Dry Creek stood a little taller, a little wiser, forever marked by the woman they once cast out and would never forget. Harper Quinn, once a fugitive, now a legend.